and we're part of John, and we have the biggest celebrity here is my mom. Mom, you give a wave. So, in thinking about this was sort of to me, the high watermark of racing, not only in Maryland, but maybe the country. And I'm hoping that sort of by reflecting on this time and this period of time that the Washington D.C. International was running, that maybe we can think sort of out of the box to help come up with a solution that nobody's thought of. Racing in general, Maryland racing is going through some transition, as it often has, and maybe by sort of reflecting on these stories, one of us or someone will come up with some innovative solutions to the current situation. But I'm excited to talk about the Washington D.C. International. It was a mile-and-a-half classic turf race at Laurel that ran from 1952 to 1994. It really highlights, this talk is going to highlight many of the great horses and their connections, as well as a host of fascinating people who played significant roles in thoroughbred racing as well as world affairs. The race and Laurel also brought various important players in my life, most important was my mother there, together, and had a tremendous impact on me in racing and business. The D.C. International was an impossible idea proposed by the new president of Laurel, John Schapiro, shortly after his father Morris bought the track in 1950. The idea of inviting horses from around the world to compete in a race against the best horses in America was just crazy. Nobody had done that before. Nobody brought horses overseas. They tried it a few times and had been very unsuccessful. But before we go into the race itself, I'd like to delve a little into the life of John's father, Morris, there, who made this all come together. And without Morris, none of this would have happened, and John, our family, wouldn't have gotten involved in racing, and there would have been no international. So Morris grew up near the Black Sea in Latvia. He was 9 when his father died of a heart attack, and that was the end of his formal schooling. A short time after his father died, he quit school to work full-time to support his family. He was working as a porter in a resort in the Black Sea when one day a policeman approached him. He had been humping luggage through the sands of a resort hotel, and the policeman had asked for everyone's papers that was working that day. And he leaned right into his face and said, "So you're a Jew, aren't you?" And Morris vowed then and there to do whatever it took to escape Eastern Europe and get to America. So the trip to America would cost 100 rubles, about $50, and it took him 8 years until he finally had the money. When he did, he jumped a cattle car and got himself to Hamburg, Germany, where he killed 2 weeks waiting for the SS Pennsylvania. 162 in first class, 197 in second class, and 2,382 in third class for steerage. And that's where he was, down in the bottom of the boat. And there were 500 to a room and no lights outside. They never ventured to the surface the whole time, the whole 2.5 weeks. It was miserable on that boat, and what was worse is Morris had $10 in his pocket. He told this story, which I got to hear an interview with, and it was an audio recording, which was amazing. He had $10 in his pocket, and he had a 25-cent piece in his sock. And while he was sleeping one night, somebody pickpocketed and took the $10. So that left him with 25 cents, or a 25-cent piece when he got to Ellis Island. And, it was looking pretty bleak at that point. So he found lodging and got himself a construction site, a job on a construction site. So, as luck would have it, one day some construction debris fell on a worker standing right next to him and killed the guy dead. Morris quit that day. It was a cold winter in New England, and anywhere south seemed like a good idea. So he worked and got himself $12.50, which was enough to get him as far south as Baltimore on a tramp steamer. It was mid-February in 1904. And by the way, he spoke broken English. He had only learned English from reading newspapers and so on. So he was, handicapped at best. And that was when he arrived in Baltimore. It was weeks before the Great Baltimore Fire. Most of the city was burned to the ground. Had he been there a month earlier, who knows if he'd have survived it. So he gets a job for 10 cents an hour at the old Southern Hotel at Redwood and Howard. He eventually runs into a distant cousin named Louis Schapiro, who hires him to start peddling scrap on Caroline Street in Fells Point. Pretty soon he buys his cousin out for $100 and starts the Boston Iron and Metal Company. 119 years later, it's still an ongoing entity. So now we're back to 1904. And after many ups and downs, he makes enough money to buy a brewery and a distillery, which is kind of exciting. He bought them when Prohibition hit, so nobody wanted them. He bought them at cents on the dollar. And he was allowed to make near beer at the brewery, which was called Arrow Beer. And then he was allowed to make a certain amount of whiskey for medicinal purposes only. This is during Prohibition. But in the story he tells that the guys, so they were barely surviving, they really couldn't even afford to make payroll, but when they had a federal agent who came every day to oversee the distillery. And so the federal agent took a 2-hour, sometimes a 3-hour lunch break, and when he left, they would fire up those stills and they'd make double their quota and sell it out the back door. And that's how they were able to survive during Prohibition by, making a little money and selling it, basically bootlegging. So Prohibition ends, and he sells both the brewery and the distillery, and he makes some good money, and he starts breaking naval and merchant ships. So he has a scrapyard in Baltimore, and one that his son, John's older brother, Joe, opens up in California. But everything almost came to an end. The U.S. government was selling these surplus Navy ships after World War II, 1947. They were selling all these Liberty ships. They had tons of surplus ships. And Morris had made a deal to buy 27 ships from the U.S. government, and they reneged. The price went up, and they reneged, and he borrowed the money, and it was going to cost him a fortune and possibly lose the business. Fortunately, there was a senator in Maryland, United States Senator Millard Tydings, who stood up for him and saved the day. Little did each of them realize that Morris's son would subsequently marry Millard's daughter, Eleanor, who's right back there. And that's how I arrived on the scene. And I'll show you a picture, but Morris would go on to later buy the SS Pennsylvania, the ship that he came over on, and I'll show you a picture in a little bit. He bought that ship for scrap that he came over on, and Mom she and I have the transom from that ship forward and backwards, which he scrapped, which is kind of a neat full circle. So anyway, by 1950, Morris had the dough to buy Laurel and give John the golden opportunity. The logistics of an international horse race were daunting. Several had tried it and they'd failed, mostly because the horses just couldn't recover from the trip to run well, never mind the return. Remember, horses were traveling by boat. The horses did travel overseas, but it would take them a couple of weeks and then they'd go through an extensive quarantine. So the thought of a horse running after that, coming off the boat, was pretty unlikely. The first horses ever to be flown transatlantically were just a few years before 1950, and they still hadn't perfected it. Not to mention, the guy proposing it, John Schapiro, was the non-horsey son of a Jewish scrap guy now living on North Avenue, Morris, who never made it past the 3rd grade. John himself would graduate in 1936 from Stanford and then serve in the U.S. Coast Guard during the war. The non-horseman part is not entirely true. John had ridden a handful of times before 1950. One time he was home from vacation at school, and his father had been given a horse and a companion that he kept at his Howard County farm. John said he wanted to go out and visit one of his friends, so he takes the horse, doesn't really know how to ride, and he rides up Route 40. He said he was doing well, he was almost to his friend's place, and a truck went by and backfired, and the horse wheeled and bolted with him back down Route 40, down the center of a concrete ribbon lane. He said he couldn't stop, tried to swing, whatever. He was looking for a place to bail out, but it was concrete, and he was, that was going to be bad. So he goes all the way back to the stable, and John gets clothesline coming through the stable door. And knocked out, but he survives. So anyway, now John, this is 1950, John's the president of this new track, and he feels he should get to know the horseman. He's there, and so a young trainer named Bernie Bond reluctantly agreed to let John gallop some horses. So John's galloping these horses every day, and not really because Bernie Bond thought he was going to be much help or anything, but just be afraid he wouldn't get stalls if he didn't let the owner gallop these horses. So after watching this for a few months, a young Maryland horseman approached John with an idea. this gentleman said, "Mr. Schapiro, why don't you come to Moncton with me and let me introduce you to my sister? She'll get you a nice big steady fox hunter and it will accomplish two things. First, you'll be more popular on the backside because you'll stop taking the $1 per horse these boys are losing every time you gallop one of their horses. Second, and most importantly, your chances are less likely of getting killed." That horseman was Jackie Bosley and his sister was Sarah Secor. Sarah sold him a wonderful Irish horse named Kelly, and our families have been close friends for the last 73 years. JB?
I can go with that.
Yeah. And JB actually, the next horse John bought, we have a picture of, and JB rode that horse at 10 at the hunter trials. And John hunted it for 18 consecutive Thanksgivings. So, anyway, John's now off and away at the races, and he's at the track every morning. He's riding Kelly around, this big, good-looking Irish hunter, and he's not going to die galloping horses. So he proposes this concept. Imagine, you all know Maryland horsemen, and they can be a little stubborn in their ways. And here's this little Jewish scrap boy coming in telling them about a horse race. It's going to be a great thing, and they're pretty skeptical. So the first running is in 1952 with 7 runners. 2 came by boat, and the winner came on a plane, which took 28 hours from England, with 2 stops for refueling. But by all accounts, it was a roaring success with a record crowd, and we'll see some video footage of that in a minute. 12 months later, a French horse, Warden, won it, and the naysayers were speechless. So one other memorable thing happened before the inaugural race. John was in, that could be an important call, I think. John was in Longchamp with Mom, and actually, Mom arrived on the scene a little bit later. He was in Longchamp, and there was a 17-year-old boy out in front of the paddock, and he was doing some sketches. And John said, "Well, look, I've got a proposition for you. If you come to my race, I'll pay your expenses if you come to the International. I'd like you to do some caricatures of my guests and horses and so on." And so he said, but the catch is that you're going to have to ride with the horses because I'm not giving you a ticket to fly privately. You're going to ride with the horses. So that person was Pierre Belloc, and for the next 50 years, well, then after the races, so he came and did the cartoons, which you've seen, which we have some of the programs out there. And then John got him a job at the Daily Racing Forum, and for the next 50 years, Peb did amazing caricatures on the cover of the Daily Racing Forum most days, and really enhanced racing immeasurably, both steeplechasing and flat racing, and really added a sense of humor to our sport that really was much needed and appreciated. So looking back at the 30 years of the International, I still marvel at what a brilliant stroke of vision John had. And if you think about it, if you have a great horse and you go to, and that horse takes you somewhere, for example, you had Marty Sanger had Inkslinger that went to the Cheltenham Gold Cup, and Tommy Smith with Jay Trump, and the Fenwicks and Stewarts with Ben Nevis. And if you show up at a foreign country with a horse, I mean, the press hangs on your every word. It's just an amazing experience to do that. But that only lasts for a year or two, even if you've got a really sound horse. What John did was to go around the world. They would go to the King George Queen Elizabeth Stakes with Mom. Every year for 30 years, they'd stay at the Connaught Hotel. They would have a reception for the trainers the night before. They would go to the Arc de Triomphe in Paris for 30 consecutive years. They would stay at the Ritz Hotel, have a reception for all the trainers the night before. They were greeted with, amazing. Mr. and Mrs. Claus wouldn't have been treated any better than they had a pocket full of invitations to the International with an all-expense-paid trip if you were lucky enough to receive one of those. So it was just an amazing thing to accomplish. Not to mention the fact that, one of the biggest successes diplomatically, and again, there was a great writer in the Washington Post, and she said that Laurel Racecourse is the only racetrack with a foreign policy. And they were really important. When they had these races that, again, a lot of you went to, the embassies were all excited about them, and they would come to the races. And the other thing they did was they had the International Ball was the night before the race, which was another sort of stroke of genius. If you've been to, because the night before, everybody's a winner. where you go to the example of the Maryland Hunt Cup Bowl, you know, the winner's excited and everybody else is crying in their soup, and it takes a little bit of the edge off the party. But if you have the party the night before, it's a lot more successful. So it really was an amazing time, and you'll see from the pictures that my mother was a huge part of it. So John's mission was, when he went to the Ark and the King George, Queen Elizabeth, and they went to Australia and they went to Japan, their mission was, how do we talk these owners and trainers into sending their horses over to this race, this experiment, get them on a plane. It's going to be a long thing. And Mom was a huge part of getting those, people, charming them for years and getting them to bring a lot of great horses. One of the highlights, and again, we'll go through a slideshow and talk about some of the races that I thought were the most fun or important. The Queen of England had never raced a horse in the Royal Colours, had never raced outside of Great Britain prior to 1954 when Landau ran at the International. So that was a huge deal. And years later, Mom and John were invited to the Court of St. James to be presented to the Queen. So it was really an amazing run, and now we'll show you a little video of it, and then a few pictures, and maybe have a question or two, or a story to tell. So now we're going to show you a couple of... All right, so that is the SS Pennsylvania. That's the ship that that Morris came over on in steerage at the bottom, and he eventually bought it back and scrapped it. John's fine, Morris. So this is what Baltimore looked like after the Baltimore fire, and you can see Morris, right? I'm just kidding. Morris may be in that picture, but that's what Baltimore looked like the day that Morris arrived. So here's a shipbreaking operation. This is National Metal and Steel, which I went out to work for in Los Angeles. Pretty messy operation. Nobody else in the family really was excited about it, so I took the initiative. And that business, not in that form, but still exists. But that's breaking of ships after World War II. So here's the crowd. You see the steeplechase fence. This is a picture of the crowd in 1952, which is pretty amazing. You can see how well everybody dressed in those days. I'm not sure if we could institute that dress code again or not. Be good for the hat business. So this is Will Wynn. He was the winner of the first international, and that was really a stroke of luck because had it not been, people just thought there's no way a foreign horse can compete after 27 hours and 2 fueling stops. They set up a quarantine at Laurel, so they got special permission from the Department of Agriculture to be able to train the horses after they landed. And that's Will Wynn, who was the first winner. And there's another shot of him. And so here's Peb, just to give you an example of Peb's amazing humor. And I just have a couple of examples, but he was he was brought by, but for John Schapiro, no Peb. Can you all read that?
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, that's it. That's Alfred Vanderbilt on the right, and hold on one second here. Let's see if I can. Alfred Vanderbilt, and the president of Chanel is the gentleman next to John there. We can keep going. That's Mom with the First Lady of Japan and the French ambassador. Mom's on the left. Ellie, give a wave. That's John, Ellie, and her brother, Joe Davies, and that's the senator, I think, from Montana. But that's the smile. There's Mom again. Keep going. There's Mom again with another, the ambassador to Japan. Next. And that's 1969. That's Mom charming the Soviet ambassador Dobrinin. And this is John getting the Chevalier de Mérite Agricole from the French government for his contribution to French racing. They were pretty pleased that they won some good races. That's the New Zealand Prime Minister, R.D. Muldoon, with John. And that's Kelso. We're going to watch a film of Kelso. So Kelso was second 3 times in a row, and we won't tell you what happened the 4th time. Make it exciting for you. There's Kelso. And there's Kelso. And that's the infield of Laurel, and that's the Ali Khan, who was a regular visitor, along with his father, the Aga Khan, who I think we've got in maybe the next slide. Yeah, that's the Aga Khan on the left, and John. And that's, let's see, that's Geet or Roth. I couldn't even know. Not sure who that is. There's Mom with U.S. Senator Mike Mansfield from Montana. He was the longest serving Senate Majority Leader at that time. And Mom with that great smile. Yeah, these are the, those are the Wildensteins, father and son, I think. And that's, that is, I think, Okihito, who was a prince of Japan, while they still have the royal family going. And so those are the troikas that are famous. That not only did Russia insist on sending their 2 racehorses, they also said they had to send the troikas. So I think that was an added expense that John absorbed that year. But it was worth it. The crowd loved it. And that's the president, again. One of the amazing things during the height of the Cold War,
That's quite a picture.
you know, during the height of the Cold War, President of the United States couldn't get his call returned from Nikita Khrushchev, but he would always take John Shapiro's call because he wanted to, through an interpreter obviously, but he wanted to send some horses over here. So the Russians never won the race, but it certainly, you know, helped cool relations to have Russian horses running in this race. Just an amazing thing. That's obviously Eisenhower on the left. And that's Paul Mellon, leading Fort Marcy, who won it twice. And again, the thought of, you know, Morris Shapiro, you know, coming over in steerage and arranging, you know, for his son to run this race and become friends and get an audience with, you know, the Queen of England and become friends with, you know, the most important, successful businessman in the world was a pretty amazing story. And, yeah, that's Mr. Mellon. Elliot Birch was the trainer. And you can see John there.
Is that the trophy?
Yeah, that's the trophy. So that's the main trophy, which Cricket and I are trying to figure out where that might be. And then the winner was given a replica, sterling silver both. And they were given the replica to take home. But we would like to figure out that trophy if Laurel.
Absolutely.
If we can buy the statue of Billy Barton, we're also going to get that trophy thrown in.
Do you know which company made the trophy?
I don't, you probably
We don't, but I mean, you know, one of the Steve or Kirk or Steve or somebody local. Tiffany.
Maybe your mother remembers. I don't know, we gotta find it.
All right, we're doing that.
I would guess it might be Tiffany because those horses are very reminiscent of some of the Woodlawn House.
Yeah. So that's Paul Mellon. John. That's Gina Lola Brigida. Mom will remember her. John was really fascinated. So John's looking at the trophy.
Yeah.
He's admiring the trophy. He's admiring the trophy, and yeah. So again, dignitaries that came to the track to present the trophy. We'll see some more coming up. But you know, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Walter Cronkite presented the trophy one year. I mean, it was just amazing. We'll keep going. Elizabeth Taylor's coming. That's Gina Lola Brigida again. John accumulated a number of her pictures. And that is the some baroness. Can't remember. That's not Gina. That's Gina.
No.
Can't remember her name. That's not Gina. There's Jacqueline Smith, one of Charlie's Angels. And that's Cary Grant on the right. I mean, so again, to put a race together and have everybody come up to the President's Lounge, you just couldn't have had a more... I mean, even the Kentucky Derby today has the odd celebrity that comes through a teeming mass, but to have them come, the level of celebrities that came to Laurel and would come up to the President's Lounge for the toast afterward was pretty special.
Is that Cam Calloway?
That's at Laurel in the President's Lounge. Oh, that's Joe DiMaggio. Sorry, yeah, on the left.
And now you
Yeah. There's Mom. That's the fetching look that got all these people to show up at Laurel. All right, that's everybody know. Somebody smudged John Warner's coat there. I'm not sure how that happened, but anyway, she was very fun and presented the trophy. Senator John Warner, and there's Richard Nixon. He's the only one who might have been paid to show up at the race. There's the check. He was not president at the time, but he was to become president. But that's, again, tribute to the level of importance that this race was given. And this is kind of funny. I just saw this. This is live on eBay right now. This is the acceptance from the hand-engraved acceptance from the Queen to bring Landau to the Washington D.C. International. And somebody held on, Mom, we should have had this. We were robbed. This should be ours.
You can buy it now.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really neat.
And this, I'm sorry that Frank Monsell didn't make it here, but Frank's father trained this horse Mongo, and J.V. Secor behind me rode a number of good steeplechase horses that were by Mongo, and Mongo beat Kelso the year before 1960. So he won in 1963, and that was a great year. And I love that painting by Richard Stone Reeves.
That is great.
And again, Frank Monsell's father, Downey, who went on to win the Maryland Hunt Cup, and he beat Kelso by half a length.
And Joe, I think in the day, your stepfather had Richard Stone Reeves do a portrait of every winner.
Yeah. So that was sort of funny. John had a lady who worked for him, and she was in charge of, she was a publicist. And so she would quietly slip over to the owner, whoever it was, Nelson Bunker Hunt or Paul Mellon, and say, this is not required, but it's customary for the winning owner to either have a bronze or a painting done and given back to the owner of the racetrack. We're not saying it's required, but it's what people do. And by the way, these are the artists that we kind of prefer. And so, Mom has an amazing collection of paintings and bronzes that, sometimes they would do both, like Paul Mellon would give a painting and a bronze.
Dick Reeves was no slouch.
Yeah, he was no slouch.
Wow.
And that's Fort Marcy. The Survivor, Raymond Guest. And he won the Epsom Derby and came over. And there's Lester Piggott, who won it a number of times. And that is Dahlia, I believe. 1973, she was the first millionaire mare. Hall of Fame, Maurice Zilbert, she was in the Hall of Fame. Maurice Zilbert trained her. He was a character. So she won the King George Queen Elizabeth Stakes at Royal Ascot by 6 lengths. And then she came and a horse called Big Spruce was second to her. Big Spruce had just been second to Secretariat at Woodbine. And so Maurice Zilbert, who was a very outspoken French trainer who trained in Chantilly, and I got to gallop a couple of horses for him when I was a young lad. And he said to the press that day when Dahlia won the International that Dahlia would beat Secretariat at any racetrack at any distance, and he'd be willing to put up the purse to prove it. He kind of knew Secretariat wasn't going to take the challenge, but nonetheless, she was amazing, and the first mare to win over $1 million. And that's Nelson Bunker Hunt, Henry Kissinger, Maurice Silbert on the left, Sandy Hawley's the rider, and Nelson Bunker Hunt, as you all may remember, tried to corner the silver market, became quite...
He and his brother.
He and his brother. And he had a great day. And again, it was really amazing to have Henry Kissinger there. He had just negotiated some serious peace accords. We could use him now. I'm afraid he's a little past his prime. He's still alive. But, anyway, great shot. And a great win with Dahlia. That's Argument. And so that's 1980. And you may recognize the guy leading him is Barry Gordy, the head of Motown Records. And Barry Gordy, and that's Lester Piggott again riding him. And they'd won the Arc de Triomphe, and Barry Gordy, you can shorten the process. If you want a horse to win a good race, you can shorten the process by buying one that's already won kind of an important race. So he bought the horse about 2 weeks before the International, and he came and won the International, and he really had a good time. He brought an entourage, and he livened up that President's Lounge like it had never been livened up before.
Oh, yeah.
So that was pretty fun. And this was my favorite horse, and this was kind of the end of John's reign, and it was really a fitting end. That's All Along. She was just amazing. She was the first horse in the world to win $2 million in one season. I'm not sure of this, but I think Walter Cronkite might have presented the trophy. I can't be positive, but he came one year, and I think it might have been this year. The owner was Daniel Wildenstein, largest art dealer in the world. But more important, All Along was just spectacular. She won 4 Grade 1 races in 41 days. This was the culmination. From October 2nd to November 12th, 3 countries, 4 racetracks. She defeated 51 world-class colts, and I think retired after that. But she was just spectacular, and that was really, again, John sold the track in 1984. I was graduating in college, ready to take over, and instead I went to sell cable TV door to door. If only. And anyway, that was great. John received many accolades. One of them was he was Sports Illustrated 1961 Man of the Year, and was just an amazing man and an incredible father to me. And I was just so privileged to be a part of this whole experience. And Mom, I thank you for making it all happen. So I'll end with a tribute to my dear mother who is here, and thank you all so much. Any questions?
Can I start with just so 84, the first Breeders' Cup was run in 84. So did anybody consult with him? Did somebody pick his brain about international horses? Or?
I don't think so. I think that John, he tried very hard to find a sponsor, a really good sponsor. He had a couple. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention one thing about All Along. So he got an insurance policy from Lloyd's of London for $1 million because no horse had ever won the Arc. I can't remember if it was the Arc and the King George and the International. Very few had tried, but nonetheless. So he got, for $50,000 premium, he got $1 million policy on the International for anybody to win those 3 races. And the first year, All Along did it. So she got the $1 million, and Lloyd said, "Thank you very much, not interested in that." So that sort of, was hard. And then I think, to say that it was the predecessor of the Breeders' Cup. The Breeders' Cup was facilitated by the fact that John had paved the way for horses to fly here on a regular basis and successfully compete. The tally was about 50-50. It was in the 30-some years, or maybe 40, it was almost 20 20 wins of the U.S. and 20 wins of foreign horses. It was fairly close, but luckily, I mean, had American horses won the first 5 years, it wouldn't have made it. So it was really critical that Wilwyn won the first year from England, and then Warden won the second year from France. That really cemented it. The Breeders' Cup was a different concept, which was brilliant, which was everybody who has a mare and breeds a horse for 30,000 mares a year for, you know, a few $100, $1,000. Geez, there's the dream. I'll buy a lottery ticket and my horse will be able to compete. So that was an income stream that was able to be channeled toward a racing day. That was a brilliant idea. And John, by doing the international, he facilitated a way for the foreign horses to come and transport.
But
the mechanics. And then,
nobody had done that.
Yeah, and so, you know, he had run, 30 years is a long time to run a business or to push a concept, and it was time. So, and the other thing that happened, this is apart from the international part, but for Laurel, the horsemen and the legislature and the racetrack owners have had a challenging relationship for a long, long time. The three of them trying to run a business. Unlike, Formula One racing, car racing, where you had, Bernie Ecclestone was running the whole show, he was calling the shots. In our sport, especially in the state of Maryland, we have these three diverse entities that need to come together and agree to something, which has always been challenging. And so every time the racetrack owners would come to the legislature and say, hey, we need a little relief here, you're taking too much of the purse. They're saying, oh, you rich guys that own the tracks, we're not helping you. And the horsemen would pile on. And so nobody really worked together. Frank DeFrancis became friends with John. He'd come to town, was a very smart businessman, and bought Laurel Raceway. And Frank DeFrancis came, and he had the right personality at the right time. Again, John he didn't give me time to get back from college. It was like a week before I had graduated, or I could have helped him with this. But anyway, Frank DeFrancis was the right guy at the right time. And Frank DeFrancis came to the state legislature and said, look, Maryland racing is going down the tubes. Right now they were taking, and I think my numbers are close if they're not exactly correct, the legislature was taking 5% of every dollar bet, or something to that effect, which was a lot. And Frank DeFrancis came and said, look, I'll buy this racetrack, I'll buy Laurel, and bail you guys out, but you've got to do something for me. You've got to reduce it to 1/2 of 1% of the take. So all of a sudden, if the deal goes through and Frank DeFrancis takes over, he's got millions of dollars of extra to improve the plan, increase the purses, whatever. So he looks like a hero. But he really was, because John didn't have the political capital to pull it off. And DeFrancis said, look, hey, if this doesn't work for you, I can do something else. I'll find another business to go in. And the legislature was scared enough, and the horsemen were scared enough, that for the first time in 50 years, they said, okay, we better go with this guy. Unfortunately, Joe DeFrancis has a representative in the room, but Joe was not as popular as his father, didn't have the charisma that his dad did.
You said Frank had the political capital. He knew how to work not only the state legislature, but Washington. And so he was the right man at the right time. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to really, see it. It came to fruition, but
Frank was the senior partner of Boykin and DeFrancis in Washington, and he knew how to handle, and he also was the attorney for the Vatican and the German government. So he knew how to handle problems. When he got here, it was like a pro football player coming to play against the varsity at a school or something.
Yeah.
He could wrap those guys around his fingers.
And
So-
at that time, there were the two track runners, too. So
Yeah.
you had Frank
And
Cohen.
Cohen.
So you were able to work, leverage them. Having two different track runners was a real help at the time. Since
Jay?
Can I ask something?
Sure.
Or are you still talking?
No, I'm good. I'm gonna shut up.
So, Joe, fascinating history. I mean, absolutely fascinating. Ellie, well done.
Must have been fun. We're all jealous.
You still like you were back then on the dance floor?
There's a
Yes,
smile.
yes.
There's a smile.
So, but you look at today, what a mess we're in today. And as you pointed out in your early comments, there's no glamour anymore. It's just an absolute rat race, right? And a dying rat race. And I don't know who's here from the current owners, but
Bernie Ecclestone.
Yeah.
Formula One racing. I mean, to have someone, be in charge and, to be czar for a day, and to have those three groups say, look, we need somebody special, let's pick this person. But you're right, to pull the glamour back that it had, and it's possible. That one of the challenging things, I think, is that the slots money really confuses, for years the racetracks, getting that extra slots money, it's so much that instead of focusing on, let's put on this amazing product for the day, and let's have, all these great races, and let's figure out a way to attract new people and young people and get amateur races at the end of the day, a bumper and participating like they do in Europe. It gets clouded by the fact that all of a sudden we've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of slots money, which is kind of good for the horsemen, but you get kind of lazy and soft, and you're not as sharp if you're getting a huge amount of money coming no matter what you do in your back pocket from the slots. So it's kept us from being. It's like if your business, all of a sudden somebody says, well, we're going to give you $50,000 a month no matter whether you sell any widgets or not. And then you get a little lazy. Geez, am I going to show up at 6 in the morning? I got to get there at 10 because I'm still getting the $50,000 a month. And I think we've gotten pretty complacent. We haven't had to put on a great product because the slots money's coming.
Yeah.
If we just keep fighting in the legislature and keep. Dr. Harrison, you got a thought on that?
Joe's right, this was.
We don't want to get too far in the weeds with how we solve racing. We're trying to celebrate the international,
Yeah.
but it would be, I think all the time, how do you make a day? And an invitational was so special to pick horses from around the world and get those people to come and get the embassies.
Right.
It was amazing.
You don't think there's any hope of bringing back a race like this?
Well, how much money we got in this room? Gary?
Well, Joe, you talked about John Schapiro going full cycle and buying the boat that brought it over and then scrapping it. Now that you've made all this money with the scrap metal business, why not take Laurel for full cycle and you buy it back?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's something.
Joe, I have two questions.
I'm going to think about it, Gary, get back to you.
The second horse that won it was a French horse. Did it fly over or did it come over on a boat?
No, it flew. And it trained in Chantilly, and I should know more about it more than the second, but that's all I remember. But they flew from that time on. I don't think there were any more coming on the boat after the first year.
And then those mares, did they get a weight allowance in that race? Or were they grab equal to the horse?
No, I think the mare's got a weight allowance.
What was the
First
first?
start out there.
Well, the purse, I think, started at $50,000, and then, again, this horse got $1 million bonus, but I think it sort of leveled off at, it was $250 for a long time, and again, he wasn't able to, that was, John had a lot of strengths, but for whatever reason, the people, around, he was never able to get a really good sponsor, to a lasting sponsor. The Chicago race, the Arlington Million, found a sponsor. I think Marlboro was the sponsor.
In those days, there were some cigarettes.
There were some cigarettes and liquor companies.
They all went away.
But again, it kind of ran. John had 30 great years, and
And he paid all their expenses, correct? So
Yeah,
that was a huge part of it. Somebody to pay everything to bring you over.
so when you'd show up, I mean, again, Mom and John are showing up at everybody loved them. I mean, every year to come in. If you finished first, second, or third in the ARC, here was this beautiful hand-engraved invitation to come, all expense paid on a
I think
wonderful
that was a
trip.
big part of it. The prestige was a huge part of it.
Yeah. So if we do resurrect it, you're all invited. You're the core group that came. You're all invited to the President's Lounge and the first ball, free of charge. Yes, Mike.
How did John feel, if you ever heard him express it, regarding the Japan Cup? Was he proud that the idea went on, they took it and ran with it, or did he see it as some sort of pleasure?
No, I think he loved, international racing, and he loved the thought of, horses coming from all over the world and traveling. So, I think that, I never saw him express any sort of jealousy. I mean, he loved it. And then, in later years, his after he sold the track, then his passion went to, his farm and his family and fox hunting and he hunted that horse that JD rode and Joker and hunted him for 18 consecutive years. He wasn't a great rider. We used to sort of think about him as a little bit like Mr. Magoo. He would sit up there and Mr. Magoo, I don't know if you remember that show, but he would drive around up over hills and through traffic and everything. Nothing would ever happen to him. And John, had an amazing career. He wasn't a great rider, but he stayed out of their way. He wasn't a big guy. And he would just hang on for dear life.
Like the next strap.
Yeah, like the next strap. Go out and look it up. And so I remember he was 83, and he was, at that time, he had a little bit of a heart thing, and he was on Coumadin. And the doctor said, well, you're really not supposed to ride. And John said, well, maybe I'll ride, but I just won't jump. And so we were out hunting on a day. It was his 83rd birthday, and Eileen is laughing because she's 75. What do you know? She hunts 3 days a week, by the way, and she might be over. It's not a big deal, but for Eileen, but for John it was. And hounds took off, and John had one of the best days that we could just jump. We won't jump anything big. And hunted for an hour and a half, and then it started to rain, and we galloped all the way home. We like to gallop home. We're supposed to walk home fox hunting, but John he liked to go anyway, he had a great run, and he loved every minute of the International.
I think we need a documentary. I've been telling Joe that for years. This deserves a documentary. I don't know how to do that, but I would love to try to talk to people about it. The story is so amazing. There's just have been no big ideas in horse racing. That's one of our problems. And to have this be not remembered as it should be, and him not to be remembered as it should be, I think is a shame.
You're absolutely right.
And the connection of a 9-year-old boy who's lost his father
It's an amazing story.
and hauling luggage, in the Black Sea, and somehow he ends up, buying a racetrack and getting his son. John, by the way, went to his father, never made it past 3rd grade, but he wanted to be sure, wanted to be sure that his son got educated. John got into Stanford, which is a pretty big deal. Went to public school in Baltimore, and again, they had a house on North Avenue. Go by North Avenue on your way home.
Not now.
And John told me that he took he had some fun summer jobs. He drove a beer truck, and those were the days, of course, when they had racing at Cumberland and Bel Air and Haverty Grace and all those small tracks, and they were trying to buy up days once they got the track. But John took the Greyhound bus to and from Stanford from Baltimore. Yeah. So thank you all for coming. And another question, Russ.
Yeah. So during this time, you must have traveled around all these countries, did you not? And what sort of experiences riding at some of the better, what do you call them, yards, or any good horses you got on while you were there?
So again, we lightly touched on it. So Peb was this amazing guy that John, they were fast friends their whole lives. And Peb started, at the end of his career, he started this amateur riders club. And because he had a son that liked to ride, and so his son Remy, who's still a cartoonist now, is a great guy. And so he and I and Peb kind of facilitated this, both our fathers really. And we got to travel around. I rode in Russia with Liz McKnight back there. Liz, give a wave. Liz was on a team. There were 5 of us, and we rode at the Moscow Hippodrome. And that was, and Liz will tell, one of the neatest experiences that I've ever had with horses was, we show up there and, these Russians, maybe they've seen a glimpse of Dallas or something on TV. They figure all Americans, weigh 350 pounds and have a big cowboy hat. And so, we show up and these guys, the Russians are really good horsemen. The Japanese have a different style. They're sort of like this, and they look like they're not natural horse people. But the Cossack horsemen are amazing, and the Russians are great horse people. And so to go and, we're standing around there, and we're going to get on these horses that we're going to race. There's a Russian team, a German team, and an American team. And so these Russian horsemen bring a horse out, and, we're not really speaking the language, and they're not speaking the language, and you're on this horse that clearly maybe not going to speak the language, and get a leg up, and to be able to go out on the track and go for a gallop. Remember they had these sort of canvas reins, which were kind of unusual and whatever. But to be able to sort of sit up on a horse and gallop around in Moscow on a horse and come back and have that Russian trainer sort of smile at you like, wow, okay, you guys, you're not all cowboys. You can ride a horse, and that language that we immediately connected. We had the best time. And,
Hospitality is amazing.
yeah, and John came with me. He didn't come with me to that trip, but John, in his retirement, came with me to France. I rode the first time at Auteuil, which is in Paris, over the big steeplechase course. They have an amateur race every year called the Grand Marshal of Foch, and I got there making lots of excuses. I was riding a pretty good horse, and they have a gross open ditch, and they have the bullfinch is 8 feet tall, and they have to jump through the bullfinch, and the double berrière is, these big wide things, all kinds of jumps. And so I show up with my American girths, and I had making excuses. Like Jay Griswold in the Maryland Hunt Cup, I had a terrible cold, my ears were stopped up, and lost them. Anyway, I get on this horse and gallop down to the start, and my saddle goes whoop right up over the withers. And I don't really know how to communicate. I mean, I speak a little bit of French, not enough to explain that I need to get off him. So I just say, well, what the hell, I'm going to go for it. So I make it about halfway around, and my horse stands off, so the gross open ditch is, from me to Cricket, probably farther. And it's this huge ditch, and so my horse stands off and lands straight into the hedge. And again, I'm sure it was my fault, and I go up on his ears, and now I've got the American flag. John is up in the stands, very proud of his son there. And I'm upside down, hanging on this horse all the way, and the next fence is called the mur, which is a wall which they've got like stucco on it. It's a concrete wall, and they've stuccoed it. And so I'm seeing it from upside down backwards, and I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure out how to crawl back into the tack. And about a stride or two out from the mur, I was like, this is not going to happen, because he's going to just pile drive me into the mur. So I let go, hit the ground, which was highly embarrassing. And anyway, John took it all in stride. He still acted like he knew me. And we got back. And John and I went back the next year, and I got another ride, and I jumped around and finished 5th. So I didn't redeem myself. But we had a great time. And the other fun thing, we went to England. John came with me on some of these amateur trips. We went to England, and I rode a bumper race, and we stayed with John Franco, who was an 8-time champion jockey in England, just the coolest, most fun guy ever. And I got John a ride to the airport. John Franco gave John a ride to the airport, and he drove maybe 130 miles an hour the whole way. John said that was one of the most exhilarating experiences. So anyway, he and I had a great time, and I worked at Chantilly for a summer. When I was 17, I worked for Maurice Gilbert, who was the trainer of Dahlia, and some others, and in Deauville. And so, yeah, as a result of John's relationship with Peb, and people are still having a wonderful time. Bethany Bumgarner has traveled all over the world, still does, and his Amateur Riders Club still exists, and they still send kids all over the world. So there are pearls here that, I'm thinking about trying to add to.
I think there's a lot we could take from European racing here for American racing. But
Question about that?
I don't know how quickly times can change. We need to take some advice.
You old enough to remember Oleg Gabasov?
Oh, yes.
No.
You're not old enough. You
Remember him well.
He was a character.
He's a great friend of my father's.
Russian
He would call my father when they were staying at racing at Belmont. He'd say, Henry, we are having dinner tonight. He would tell him where, but he was always very forceful in his speaking.
We always thought he was a Russian spy.
Probably was.
All right, well, thank you all, Russ. You got another one? Final question.
Back then, there were a lot of horses from all countries. Mention a little bit about how international steeplechasing in America has become, from all these horses from England and Ireland come over here to get big money.
Yeah,
We expect to have
it's an interesting thought. I mean, the international racing part, and Cricket was just pointing out, I guess sometimes we can be protectionist. We hate to see other people come and take our money. I think that haven't really developed enough of in England and Ireland they have 800 to 1,000 restricted amateur races a year to develop new riders, kind of like a minor league in baseball. Here we have maybe 5 or 10 races a year, and so we've sort of shortcutted the process. Instead of sort of developing our own riders, it's easy because the trainers dictate the conditions, and trainers are the most, I'm a trainer, so I can say this, the most short-sighted people on earth. I mean, they're worried about what horse I have in the barn, how can I win a race next week? They're not, if you talk to a trainer and say, well, look, we could develop long-term, we could develop riders, it's going to be, the glaze right over. All they care about is who's going to ride my horse next week. If I don't have a rider, they're not interested in long-term. And since we don't develop our own riders, we've sort of fostered our sport out to the Irish mostly, and so now they have a sort of a corner on it, and they're sending over riders and horses, and I'm a little bit patriotic that way. I'd like to see Americans do a little better job because we have all the talent here. We have 230 million people, and a lot of them would love to ride over jumps at high speed. And anyway, so I'm a little competitive that way, and I look long for the day when it's not just the Irish and Gordon Elliott and that group coming over, and we're all such Irophiles that we can't believe that somebody with a tweed coat from Ireland is going to shake our hand and know us. I'd like to see us, send more horses, and I hope to have one someday to go back. I took a horse, is that Skip Crawford in the back? Skip Crawford had a great horse called Motorcade, and we went over and raced at Cheltenham, and Lonesome Glory went and won a couple of races over there, and I'd like to see us show a little pride and not just sort of surrender and say, okay, we're going to have all Irish horses and all Irish jockeys, and we're just going to have this sport for the Irish. Again, love the Irish, but I just would like to see us make efforts, and I'm going to try and do that as best I can.
Well, with pony racing and some stuff here,
Yeah,
there is
we just need an interim step, but I'm working on that.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we have this new track, Gary, we're going to have amateur races every day. We'll cultivate that.
Okay?
All right, well, thank
Thanks
you
for
all.
coming.
And we're going to, if anybody wants to
Yeah.
watch a couple of their sort of
YouTube, there's some international